hottest paranormal life show on YouTube, Into the Fringe, where we discuss lost civilizations, UFOs, cryptids, unsolved mysteries, megalithic structures, extraterrestrials, interdimensional portals, time skips, and more. Don't change that channel, because now you are leaving the mainstream and entering into the fringe.
Greetings, followers. It is I, your host, Cardinal Sin. And today we have some very special guests that I will introduce presently. Joshua Cutchin has appeared on a wide variety of paranormal programs discussing his work, including Coast to Coast AM, Mysterious Universe, Binal of America, Expanded Perspectives, Radio Mysterioso, and The Gralien Report. He is the author of 4 books, 2015's A Trojan Feast, The Food and Drink Offerings of Aliens, Fairies, and Sasquatch, 2016's The Brimstone Deceit, an in-depth examination of supernatural scents, otherworldly odors, and monstrous miasmas, 2018's Thieves in the Night, A Brief History of Supernatural Child Abductions, and 2020's Where the Footprints End, High Strangeness and the Bigfoot Phenomenon, Volumes 1 and 2, with Timothy Renner. Joshua is also a contributor to Robbie Graham's book. Sorry, it jumped on me. Reframing the Debate, UFOs, as well as David Weatherly's 2018 Sasquatch collection, Wood Knocks, Volume 3. Excerpts of his work have appeared in Fortean Times and Edge Science. Timothy Renner is an illustrator, author, and folk musician living in Pennsylvania. His illustrations have appeared in the pages of various books, magazines, fanzines, and comics, as well as on many record and CD covers. Since 1995, Timothy has been making music both solo and with his band Stone Breath. Timothy is the creator of Strange Familiars, a podcast concerning the paranormal, weird history, folklore, and the occult. He makes regular appearances on the paranormal radio show Where Did the Road Go, and has appeared as a guest on many other podcasts and radio programs, including Coast to Coast AM. Gentlemen, welcome to Into the Fringe.
Very happy to be here. It's a good way to spend a Thursday night.
Thank you for having me.
Very, very glad to have you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for agreeing to come back next week so that we can cover both volumes. Although I don't plan on covering Volume 1 tonight and Volume 2 next week. I just wanted to let you know, this is more of a casual conversation than a formal interview. You two have written a couple of very important books on Bigfoot and how the paranormal aspects versus the flesh and blood ones compare and contrast. While we have an intermediate level audience, let's get out of the way from the start. Are we dealing in facts or anecdotal information?
Yes.
Yeah. A little bit.
If Timothy doesn't have anything to say, or maybe I'll just say my piece, and then Tim might want to jump in. But sure. It's interesting. I think that a lot of different areas of the unexplained have what I've jokingly called Bigfoot envy, right? You have this great physical evidence in the form of these footprints, which I think are like really kind of the gold standard for paranormal evidence in general. I mean, you've got really detailed casts, some of them showing dermal ridges, some of them showing primate anatomy that's not human anatomy. It's like mid-tarsal breaks and all these different things that Jeff Meldrum and others like him have really discussed in their examination of these footprints. So it's like the pièce de résistance of paranormal evidence, but we still don't have a body. And then, so that that's your hard facts right there. I mean, something is making these, and I dare say a lot of the hoaxers that we see would not have the wherewithal or the skill to make hoaxes that speak to some specific primate traits that have attributes of primate locomotion sort of baked into the tracks themselves. So I think that's really compelling, and at the same time, like I said, we don't have a body. We have a bunch of anecdotal stories from people, and then you have this murky gray area that is what Timothy and I really got into, which was that you have people who are telling these anecdotal stories. And again, Tim and I have talked to enough people that these people believe what they saw. They might not have their interpretation accurate, but they saw something strange that they can't explain, right? And you have people who are reporting things like strange lights in conjunction with Bigfoot, and Bigfoot literally disappearing before their eyes. So trying to reconcile those two things, I think, is really sort of the goal of what Timothy and I set out to do. Tim would probably say that a lot less clumsily than I just did.
I don't know. Here I am being clumsy, trying to enter into it. This weaves in with the whole idea of evidence, and talk about starting off at the deep end of the pool. I mean, the wonderful evidence that Josh talked about is indeed wonderful. I mean, it's fantastic evidence, and it happens to be what I call. So I compare Bigfoot evidence to Christian relics. So your first-class relic is something from the body of a saint, hair, fingernails, bones, etc., etc. We do not have any first-class evidence from Bigfoot that isn't completely controversial. In other words, no one has, put up a Bigfoot bone or some Bigfoot blood that has been universally accepted by, science.
So this would be the difference between Class A and Class B reports?
This is the difference between what I call Class A relics or first-class relics and second-class relics in terms of evidence. So,
okay.
Like I said, I'm using the idea of Christian relics. So, a relic of a saint, first class is part of their body. Second-class relic is something the saint touched. So what we have, our best evidence in Bigfoot, amounts to second-class relics, these footprints. It's just something, whatever it was, touched. So you have bound into this mystery, this problem of first-class evidence. There's none that isn't controversial, and you can find people on both sides to say it is something or it isn't something. The footprints are excellent, and I believe, if I understand how it went, like Jeff Meldrum actually got other anthropologists and so forth to look at them and go, oh, yes, something left that, but they can't agree what left it. That's great, but that's all we have is second-class relics. It's our best evidence. So it's bound up in this mystery that something seems off about it. Something seems off that we don't have something in the evolutionary tree that matches Bigfoot, that we don't have any kind of concrete evidence of this thing, by now, essentially. So that is one of my reasons that I think it's something other. Our best evidence is witness testimony by far, which mainstream science hates. Science hates witness testimony.
But in a court of law could be unassailable.
Mm-hmm. So what we have is a lot. So yeah, is it anecdotal? Yeah, there's a lot of anecdotal stuff, but it's also our best evidence. And when I go back and look at 1800 reports of what they would have called wild men back then, and they're talking about them knocking on windows or climbing up on people's roofs or being essentially bulletproof, and these reports that people are talking about today, and these reports weren't generally available until I started publishing them. I started digging them out and finding them. So I know these witnesses haven't been reading these old newspapers and thought, oh, I'm going to talk about how it climbed up on my roof. So it jives with this report from the 1800s. So I love witness testimony rather. I think it's great evidence because it's consistent over the course of hundreds of years, but it also doesn't prove that it's an animal. So
Yeah, it's interesting to me, Tim. I'm recalling that wonderful account from somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. I can't remember exactly where, but where there was a young boy who was abducted to a Bigfoot cave with the domed ceiling, and a woman who was escorted out. For people who are listening, I might as well get into this. A boy who was abducted by an 8 foot tall wild man. This appeared in a newspaper with glowing eyes. Carries the boy into a trap door underneath the ground. He's in this domed, shining space with this strange music. And this is all accompanied by a Bigfoot, right? And then the Bigfoot goes and brings a girl who gives him an embossed card that says, leave now or you'll never leave, something to that effect.
Right.
And the boy escapes by prying open the trap door with his knife and leaving. That's a classic Western European fairy story, like even down to the other captive telling them to leave. Like it's beat for beat right out of it. But I was interested after the fact when I was looking through Mark Hall's book True Giants, which approaches the Bigfoot question from a purely zoological flesh and blood perspective, and he mentions that article, but he leaves out all that stuff. It's just like he had the article and the date quoted in there, so I knew it was the right story. But he's like, a Bigfoot took a boy to an underground lair, and that's all that he said. He didn't address any of the other outliers.
It seems like a lot of reporters and researchers leave out all of the weird details.
Well, yeah, that's what I was sort of getting at. Is one wonderful thing about Timothy's books, which are West Coast Wildman and Pennsylvania Bigfoot, Bigfoot in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania Bigfoot,
Bigfoot in Pennsylvania,
Bigfoot in Pennsylvania. Is that he had a certain amount of parameters, and he just pulled them all out of there and just let them speak for themselves. And you do see these sort of groupings that sort of come out of these different stories, like, oh, this is the wild man who's kind of civilized. This is the wild man who sounds more like Bigfoot, et cetera, et cetera. But what it really does is Timothy's work in that regard really emphasizes how, as you alluded to, the cherry picking has been going on forever. It's not just like contemporary witnesses whose stories
not
get
to be confused with the berry picking.
Not to be confused with berry picking, which has its own. If only the cherry pickers would disappear, like the berry pickers do.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those things where it's not just modern sightings that are being filtered. People will do the same thing with these older sightings as well.
Sure. So let me ask you both, just to get back to the basics here, and if you can keep your answers brief, because boy, do I have a lot of questions for you. Starting with when did you get interested in Bigfoot? Either of you can begin.
I was a child, and I saw the Patterson-Gimlin film, I believe, on In Search Of. And that did it for me. And then I saw Legend of Boggy Creek and all that great sort of pop culture Bigfoot stuff in the 70s, and I was hooked immediately.
Me too.
Also, as a child, I grew up being a big fan of monster movies. Apparently, my dad subscribed to the BFRO newsletter at one point, Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization newsletter. I wasn't aware of this until I got very deep into the subject. But Bigfoot was always my go-to unexplained phenomena. Whenever I'd buy a book or check out a book, it was always Bigfoot. It wasn't UFOs or any of the other things that I've become interested in since. It was just that. So I guess we're both born and bred Bigfoot boys.
Well, that makes three of us. Why paranormal Bigfoot rather than a previously undiscovered population of hominids?
There's two books on that. crack open those two books, but Where the Footprints End, Volume 1 and 2. But I mean, the thing that really drove the nail in the coffin for me is the amount of local reports I get in Southern York County, Pennsylvania, and I hang out with foragers and woodsmen and people who if they need to, can live off the land. And I would talk to them about a 800-pound, 8-foot hairy thing living here and having a breeding population, and they would just laugh and they say, "No way, nope, we'd know it was here. The impact would be too great, because something that large, the caloric needs would be incredibly massive." So the other option is that they're coming through the area, but that is problematic as well, because I get reports all times of year. So, it seems to be something else is going on. And So that was, kind of the nail in the coffin for me when I finally had to kind of sit down and look at the number of local reports and the witnesses. I believe they don't have any reason to make these things up. They're obviously affected by it. They're obviously scared, some of them.
You've mentioned previously you can see the fear in their eyes while they discuss the topic.
Yeah. I've had grown men who are like hunters and, pretty tough guys, like kind of shaking in front of me with tears in their eyes, telling me these stories. It's very, very moving to some people. Their encounters are very intense. So I just can't make it work as a breeding population of giant ape men. Certainly not on the East Coast. Certainly not in the UK, where there's tons of reports of that of Bigfoot there. And maybe in the Pacific Northwest, I'll leave a small possible window open for it being a possibility there, but I really don't think so. The more reports I've gathered that include these high strangeness elements just makes me think that if it's an animal, it's so unlike any other animal on the planet that it might as well be paranormal.
Yeah. I live in Kansas, where I seem to be safe. There's a stretch down the middle of the country where there's not a lot of water or granite or reports, but once you get to Colorado or Missouri, then things start to get weird. So I guess I'm safe. Maybe not in my dreams, but at least physically. Josh, did you have something that you wanted to say on that?
Well, I think that part of what Tim was alluding to is I think we both have pragmatic and contrarian streaks. Is that safe to say, Tim?
I think that's... I don't know about the pragmatic, but I'll definitely agree with the contrarian.
Well, and by pragmatic... by contrarian, I mean enough of sort of like an attitude that where we kind of like to champion things that are considered offbeat. And by pragmatic, I mean the fact that in writing this book, a lot of what we write sympathizes with skeptics. If viewed through that lens, the fact that we don't have a body. Oh, well, people don't find bear bodies very often. They decompose too quickly. Yeah, but they have. People don't find mountain lion bodies. Yeah, but they have. We killed
so
one
interesting.
Lion,
the three of us seem to come from the same viewpoint, the same perspective.
Yeah, so I think Tim and I sort of irritate some folks because they think we sound like skeptics, but no, it's trying to reconcile these people who are very genuine and this great evidence with some very solid pushback from the skeptical community as to why it doesn't sound like it's a flesh and blood creature. And then you couple that with all of the folklore motifs that crop up. You couple that with the intersections with alien abductions and fairy folklore and witches and archetypal women in white. And it just seems like we're dealing with something that is a lot more numinous than the cryptozoological establishment would have us believe.
Very good. I do have a question that's a little offbeat. It's one of my personal interests, and I wanted to bounce it off of you two since you're now the experts in the room, like it or not. When Mount St. Helens exploded, there were reports of the military picking up Bigfoot that were injured and moving them in the back of a large truck. Have you heard about these reports?
Oh yeah, and some of the reports go on to say that certain members of the military spoke Bigfoot language and were talking to Bigfoot, and the Bigfoot were directing them, I think, to other injured Bigfoots. It's been a long time since I read the story, but yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with the story. It's bizarre enough where it's wonderful, but at the same time, it's a lot there.
I have heard some people. I mean, obviously, most of the cryptozoological community is. Well, I guess they are sort of invested in that story being real, but I've heard some pretty good counters to why that story seems made up, and I can't remember what they are, and I know that sounds like a cop-out, but I've heard some stuff about some contradictory dates from the stories, or someone has tracked down where it came from and it had a source that was fictional or something. So, great story. kind of goes in my gray basket, in my maybe basket.
Nice Stanton Friedman reference.
Yeah. Uncle Stan.
I've also recently heard about stone stairs in the back of trucks driven by forest rangers, supposedly to portal areas. Have you heard about those reports?
Well, these originally started as staircases in the middle of the woods that people would find, which started, as far as I know, 100% as creepypasta on Reddit somewhere.
Right.
However, so did Slenderman, and people started seeing Slenderman entities. So did these other things. There's enough stories of people finding these creepy staircases in the woods now, and even photos of them and so forth, that, did it do the Tulpa move? Did it make the leap from legend to something more in the same way that Slenderman and some of these other things did? On the other side, in old houses, the staircase is kind of like the most solid part. It's quite possible that the whole house could fall down and the stairway would still be there.
Yeah,
Josh?
I mean, yeah, that's what I'd heard too. Is that a lot of them began on the no sleep Reddit or the creepypasta or something along those lines. But at the same time, I don't want to make it sound like I don't have a filter for things, but I do think that folklore is an alive thing, and I do think that our expectations play as much a role in the way that whatever this other realm is, whatever realm exists, I think it plays with our expectations, and we bring a lot to our experiences. So having said that, maybe in that sort of choose the form of your destructor, or even like a more benign Lovecraftian sense, where you look at something and you can't figure out what it is, so your brain says, big hairy monster, or stairs in the woods, to say nothing of the fact that you might, in a sort of quasi-Jungian way, be in this imaginal realm that can be physical and non-physical, which we can go down the rabbit hole if you want to, but
as opposed to an imaginary realm.
Right. So imaginal being the example that I always use, it's sort of cribbed from Patrick Harper, is that you can watch a dramatization of a relationship, and it can be the most real thing that you've ever seen, right? In terms of the way that it plays out, in terms of the beats that are in the relationship, in terms of the way they get together, in terms of the way they break up, and the nastiness and the feelings that they have afterwards. But none of that really ever happened. It's fictionalized. The people are fictionalized. But it's like the realest thing you've ever seen. And the emotions that it installs in you, the emotions that it evokes in you, rather, are really quite real as well. So this is sort of something that Carl Jung talked about in the Mysterium Conjunctus, is that there's sort of he posited things like flying saucers inhabited this imaginal realm that's sort of between physical and non-physical, and we don't really have the tools to describe that. And in case anybody's having any difficulty sort of thinking of this that way, the example that I always like to use is, psi phenomena. It's the one hill that I will die on in Paranormal, is that psi phenomena exists, because there's some really great laboratory experiments out there. Dean Radin, Daryl Bem, Rupert Sheldrake. I know some people push back against some of these folks, but they're really trying to show the efficacy of these things, or the reality of these things in laboratory settings. Completely non-physical, but can have an impact on the physical world. Right. Similarly, ghosts, non-physical, I think we'd all agree, if ghosts exist, which I lean towards them existing, non-physical, but can slam doors,
can leave ectoplasm,
ectoplasm, and all of that, So that's sort of what I think we're talking about, and it's starting to come. You also look like indigenous cosmologies, where there isn't a real distinction between fictions and non-fictions, even when they know something is a fiction. So I think that maybe reality might function a little bit more like that, and we don't see it in our day-to-day lives, but we see it whenever we're under the right set of trigger circumstances for one of these paranormal encounters. It's an idea, but I think it's a very powerful and explicative one in some ways.
So let me ask you guys this. Having heard what you've both said just now, How much do you think the government knows about Bigfoot? And I realize I'm asking for your opinion here.
I don't think they know that much at all. I mean, do they have an X-Files division that's interested in this stuff? If they do, I doubt they know much more, if anything, than the rest of us do.
I mean, given the stairs, the Mount St. Helens, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going on gut feeling. I just, it mirrors my feelings about UFO disclosure for the government. It's like they can't fix bridges. How are they going to explain something as deep and beautiful as the UFO phenomenon?
Right.
I mean, I suspect that like the UFO phenomena, they take it a lot more seriously than the average person does. And I would suspect that they know that something's going on. But as far as having actually had some sort of significant interaction or protocols for contact or even a Bigfoot body or something along those lines, I don't think we're dealing with that. I mean, it would be nice. I've always thought that the idea, people always said it was a big conspiracy a while back that, it was just like some endangered woodpecker can cause the logging corporation to not be able to clear cut land. So they suppressed, that was the idea, right? Like, that Bigfoot might somehow interfere in that sort of way.
Don't get Woody angry. You wouldn't like him when he's angry.
But I always thought it would be really a lot more interesting again, this is just an idea that I played with. I always thought it would be a lot more interesting and controversial and pretty much in line with the way that the government operates, that no, this is just an indigenous tribe that is human, albeit, has a lot more markers associated with, the primate side of things, but like, oh no, this is an indigenous tribe that we've mistreated and continue to this day to, slaughter and push to the margins and not acknowledge as a people. Like, I always think that is a lot more interesting and kind of in line with the way that the United States government has treated indigenous folks. But I don't really think it's the case because you have all these strange outliers of supernatural phenomena around it.
Good deal. So let's dig into the material. Many Bigfoot researchers say, keep your UFOs out of my Bigfoot, while many UFO researchers say, keep your Bigfoot out of my UFOs.
A peanut butter and chocolate, man.
Yeah. But there seems to be sightings of both in the same area at the same time. What about the crossover between UFOs and Bigfoot?
I mean, it's massive. So when I got into Bigfoot, like seriously, as a quote unquote researcher or investigator, or whatever you want to call it, whatever title you want to put into that, I naturally looked to people who've been doing it longer than me. And what they told me, many of them, was, yes, there are some reports with Bigfoot and UFO, but it rarely ever happens, and there are always outlier reports, and usually it's crazy people, and just ignore them, because it rarely ever happens. And then, really before we started doing this book, but particularly when we were writing this book, and I was researching the chapters on that I wrote on UFOs, there's no shortage of reports of wild men from all over the world and UFOs. Mm-hmm. There's tons of them, and to the point where I say jokingly, but only half jokingly, in Pennsylvania, if you find me a Bigfoot report, I will find you a UFO report around the same area within a week or two. Now, 100% of the time, no, but often you can do that. So there is an association with them. Now, what it is, I don't know. And that's the problem, because I think people, when you point this stuff out, people then want answers. Like, okay, so is Bigfoot driving around in a UFO? I don't know. Is
with Elvis.
Right.
It's always with Elvis.
Do aliens keep Bigfoot as a pet? I don't know.
Do they let it out like you let the dog out when they come? Yeah.
Yeah. It's I don't know what the connection is, but there is most obviously some kind of connection, because they are seen with such frequency. And I would like to point out, like, how rare is it to see a UFO? Incredibly rare. How rare is it to see a Bigfoot? Arguably even more rare.
Mm-hmm.
And then how rare would it be to see these two things, in the same place at the same time or relatively close together? It's the chances are astronomical. So there, to not at least acknowledge that there seems to be some unknown connection between the two, I think is very disingenuous. It's, they happen to pop up at the same time in the same place.
Yeah, I'm always reminded of, I really like to harp on this, the actual definition of Occam's razor, which was put forth by like a monk, so someone who did believe in supernatural forces.
Someone named Occam?
I believe it was William of Occam, I believe. Somebody knows otherwise. I'm not Googling it right now. But the basic summation of it is not that the simplest answer is the real one, is the most likely to be true. It's that you shouldn't multiply variables unnecessarily. That's actually the heart of it. And you can see how that sort of got misconstrued. But for me, when you start saying things like, oh, well, the Bigfoot was studying, or sorry, the UFO nauts were studying the Bigfoot.
Oh, yeah.
Or they're as interested in Bigfoot as we are. It's like, okay, yeah, you're multiplying variables unnecessarily. It's much more parsimonious to say that these are somehow related phenomena. And, it's the tenor of the conversation is changing. I mean, I would say, Tim, that the mystery lights, the ghost light phenomena in conjunction with Bigfoot is like an open secret now. Like, it's everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And if you look back, I'm a relative neophyte in terms of being like a personality, which I don't really think of myself as, but whatever.
Me either.
But I'm a real newcomer to this, and even in the time since I've been in it, we've seen this really a relaxing of these ideas. It reminds me of what our mutual friend Mike Clellan would say, which was, as soon as you get the UFO researchers to the bar after the presentations are done, you start talking to them and they open up to you about all these crazy synchronicities in their lives that don't fit the weird stuff. Yeah, that don't fit the the extraterrestrial hypothesis. And similar thing happens with the ghost lights. Well, yeah, we didn't see any Bigfoot. We went out to this land where this person says they see Bigfoot all the time. We didn't see any Bigfoot, but we saw these really strange lights bobbing through the woods, about the size of a ping pong ball, and it came up. You hear these stories. So I find it highly unlikely to have two anomalies in one place. And in some of these stories, especially the longitudinal habituation stories, you're dealing with 4 or 5 anomalies. Tim's run into people who have Bigfoot and ghosts and and UFOs and all these things. Or one of Tim's chapters in Volume 1, the company that these things keep. You've got to look at the company that these things keep in sort of like that window area sense. It really does imply that there's something going on besides big monkeys.
Yeah. Why is cryptozoology not taken seriously by mainstream science? And what is the difference between cryptozoology and cryptoanthropology? And I'll let whoever wants to take that first take it.
I would argue that part of the reason it's not taken seriously by mainstream science is the cherry picking of the details, honestly. And of course, mainstream science is going to hate anything with, it's going to hate anything weird anyway. It's going to hate any Bigfoot report, period. But when you add a UFO on top of it, that just goes in the kooky bin. They're going to want nothing to do with it because,
right.
These people, when you're talking mainstream science, you're talking about career scientists, and they have to watch their reputation as much as
protect their grant money.
Sure, yeah, as much as anybody else with that. So, I don't think most of the cryptozoologists are taking a genuine scientific approach to it. I think they're cherry picking, and they're doing kind of pseudoscience where they can, and using things like infrasound to explain away some of these bizarre effects people have around the creature, and so forth, and acting as if it's a known, like, oh yeah, that's just the creatures using infrasound. We don't know that they have infrasound, nor do we know all the effects that infrasound can produce. So that's part of it. I think part of it is just mainstream science unwillingness, like I said, to get involved in anything weird. And the cryptoanthropology is, I don't know if I invented the term, but it's a term that came to me.
It was you, or was it Vanessa Kendall? Or was it you two together? Or Can't remember.
No, I just was writing that chapter, and it just sort of.
Okay. It sounds. Yeah. It's a great idea. Sorry, I couldn't remember. Go ahead.
It sounds like as good a study of any other science as anything else.
Yeah, it sounds like somebody a lot smarter than you should have come up with it. I guess.
Nice. And it may have in fact been in use before that, but I didn't read it anywhere. I was kind of writing this chapter in the book, and I thought, why are we dealing with cryptozoologists at all? They, even the most of the most strident flesh and blood guys don't think it's a gorilla anymore. They'll tell you it's a relict hominid, which is a form of human. And at that point, it takes it out of the realm of zoology and puts it into anthropology. So I think if we're going to be looking at it in a scientific manner, I think cryptozoology is lost the game. I think there needs to be, we look at it in an anthropological sense.
Right. Can you tell us about the evolution of the satyr/fawn archetype into both the devil and Bigfoot?
I find this absolutely fascinating, and I'm glad that you asked that. So there is a very clear and well-accepted chain of custody, so to speak, of the wild man archetype that's acknowledged by mythologists from satyrs and fawns, half men, half goats, in Greco-Roman traditions, through to the European wild man archetype. Pan was a master of the woods. That's why, panic was originally a term for Pan waking up and shrieking.
I never associated Pan and panic.
Yeah, it was specifically a term for the shrieks of Pan making you feel disoriented and agitated or freaked out in the woods. So there's a direct chain of custody there. At the same time, you have these Bacchic rites that were eventually demonized by the Catholic Church as witchcraft, and of course, you have these half men, half ghosts in the service of these Greco-Roman gods. So they sort of got tied up in that witchcraft model as well, and that's why you have Satan as being half man, half goat, and a lot of the descriptions of Satan would describe him as being, covered in hair. There's even some speculation that, the British term "Old Harry" for the devil was originally not like Old Harry Harry, but was like Old Harry Hairy.
Right.
Which, Tim, I just thought might be the answer you seek for Harry Springs. So you've got that chain of custody. At the same time, you have this thing going on with Bacchus or Dionysus, depending on which particular pantheon you're looking at, who is associated with fawns and satyrs, being also associated with the green man. Oftentimes, Dionysus would be depicted as his face having a floriate motif, which sort of evolves into the green man, the symbol of fecundity. And the green man is kind of a wild man as well. It ties into a lot of these woodwose ideas, and it's its own archetype. And the green man is, also a fertility symbol in a lot of ways, and also can be a trickster symbol in that sort of fool sort of way. So it really is this nexus point of all these things, because when we talk about wild men, we're really talking about Bigfoot. I mean, I think that's one thing that Timothy and I found out very quickly, is that the thing that really fits Bigfoot more than Gigantopithecus or this relict hominid or a really hairy person or a completely undiscovered primate is the wild man archetype. Like all the things associated with wild men throughout the world, especially in Western Europe, you can find direct comparisons to. So we have this interesting conflation of Bigfoot and the devil and wild men, and sometimes it really does emerge in interesting ways. I mean, there's this long-standing belief that areas called devils this or devils that are referring to mountain devils or Bigfoot.
Hot spots or window areas. Yeah,
sort of areas where bad things would happen, but you find throughout the literature these large hairy creatures in the forest being called devils, and even in some Western European lore as well, like you had Pelosi's, which were like these hairy satyr fawn wildmen characters as well, who were described as demons. And there was like an assumption that demons were hairy, were hair-covered creatures. It's just this an assumption. So you have that in terms of folklore, but you also have something really interesting that happened, which was in 1913, the Traverse Spine gorilla flap of, I believe it was Labrador, Canada, where there were these big apes that would come along and look in people's windows, and like I think they would tap on the windows, and people had numerous sightings of these things. And what they left behind were big, like cloven hoof prints, like big oxen footprints. So
right,
it's an interesting expression of this, and I can't find a way. I can't find a way to reconcile that with hominid anatomy. What I can do is find a way to reconcile that with some sort of mythological field that we have constructed around ourselves in terms of our expectations and how we are seeing this other intelligence, whatever it may be, speaking to us through symbolism and, just the folkloric world that we've created for ourselves as a people, as a species.
I've been interested in the paranormal since I was old enough to read. My mom would take me to the library when I was 4 years old, and I would check out 10 books, the maximum allowed number, read them in a week, and then, rinse and repeat as necessary. So my interest in Bigfoot goes way back. My older brother was really into Bigfoot, and so I sort of inherited that from him, or maybe a hand-me-down, if you will. I wanted to ask both of you, have you heard the recordings Stan Gordon allegedly has of Bigfoot?
Of Bigfoot?
Allegedly.
I mean, Stan Gordon has
whatever they are.
Has a lot of recordings, so I guess I would need more specific case information.
Maybe you can school me on the recordings that he has.
Well, I mean, Stan was into technology early. I think he worked at some kind of proto Radio Shack type place when he was young, and when he started investigating, he took recorders with him. So I am told by mutual friends that he has walls upon walls of cassette tapes relative to these investigations. I know Stan. I haven't talked to him since this person told me about the walls of cassette tapes. Next time I talk to him, I will certainly ask him about it. But the tape that, and I've not heard this, but that I would love to hear, is there's a recording of the incident which opens up volume 1 of our book, where the young man seems to get possessed by a Bigfoot creature after seeing a UFO and seeing and firing on 2 Bigfoot, and he runs around screaming and growling and so forth. There is apparently a tape of this. I have not heard it, but I would love to hear it. But yeah, so I can't imagine what else Stan has. I'm sure there's a treasure of tapes that Stan has.
You wouldn't happen to be referring to the Moorhead Sierra sounds, are you? Or
sure. Tell us about that.
Well, there are a lot of people who feel that they are sort of Bigfoot speaking, which is an interesting.
Are these the sort of Asiatic Japanese growing sounds?
They're the that's that could be your ringtone if somebody wants to.
There is a Bigfoot outside my window, and you offended him greatly. I don't know what you just said, but he is mad now.
But they left these at their Sierra camp, and they're really compelling. I believe a fellow by the name of Scott Nelson, retired naval cryptolinguist, said that there were certain. Not only did he recognize things like phonemes, aspects of language, right? Aspects of language, the building blocks of language that he recognized as actually having a cadence that one would expect with an actual spoken language. But also, he claimed that there were sounds that the human voice could not make, specifically aspects that would imply that the vocal cords were like twice as long as they would be in like a 6 foot tall person or something to that effect. I think they're really interesting, and I think it's even more interesting that you you hear that sort of vague description of that sort of gibberish described, and people generally do compare it to some sort of Asiatic language. They'll compare it to Russian or Japanese or this or that or the other. Always guttural, always that sort of family of languages. At the same time, I would be remiss. We point out in Volume 1 how wild men were often believed to be able to speak, but their speak was gibberish. And not only that, but a good friend of mine, Ren Collier, made mention to me one time. He's like, Josh, have you ever considered how the Sierra sounds sort of sound like barbarous words? I'm like, not really, Ren, because I'm not an occultist. What are you talking about? And barbarous words are these sort of, they're really, when you get down to it, nonsensical words, but they do have some roots in some earlier languages, but they're sort of a magical chanting that is oftentimes quite guttural and does have that sort of similar flavor. And they're called barbarous words because they do sound sort of harsh and violent. So very similar if you can look some of these up. But also, it's really interesting. In Colin Wilson's book on poltergeist, he talks about how whenever voices are associated with poltergeist infestations, a lot of times they start out very animalistic in terms of grunts and barks, and they sort of evolve over the course of the infestation. So there's sort of a parallel there as well. I go back and forth on the Sierra Sounds. I think Ron Moorhead, I think quite a bit of them, actually, even though I do a little bit of sniping. I think in one of the books at one point about, because he says something like, ghosts don't leave footprints or something. I'm like, well, that's not true. But I think a lot of him, and I think a lot of his research, and I think he's honest. So I don't think that there's somebody hoaxing the Sierra Sounds. As far as what it represents, though, I'm kind of agnostic about. I think it's really compelling. I think it's really interesting, and I think it's interesting to compare it against things in other disciplines like EVPs and the other aspects that I talked about.
Before we ever even thought about writing this book, Josh, I remember reading something about the Skinwalker Ranch account and them hearing disembodied voices, and they described it as someone speaking Russian backwards. And
I've heard that
I immediately thought of the Sierra Sounds.
I didn't. Why didn't you remind me of that? So I could have because I completely spaced on that. I read Hunt for the Skinwalker a long time ago. If it's somewhere else, but if it's in there, I read a long time ago. And I didn't catch it when I was going back through. But yeah, that's interesting, and I wonder what it means, because that's the thing that I find really interesting about this sort of gibberish or whatever, is that it is always Asiatic, and I wonder what that means.
Mm-hmm.
But it isn't.
But that's people's go-to. So, like, what is it about that sort of family of languages? If those are linguistically related, what does that mean? I kind of said it was interesting that Gigantopithecus blacki was an Asian primate. And theoretically, it would have crossed over the Bering Land Bridge alongside our ancestors. So maybe there's some sort of Asiatic connection there. But I don't think you hear a lot about that sort of gibberish coming from the Chinese Yeren or the Almas. I don't think you really hear that as much as you do here in the New World. So you'd think that you would hear more of it if it's homegrown language.
Well, the other thing about the Sierra Sounds is I think it's almost kind of like a linguistic paradolia. I know I've heard people say I'm a native language speaker and I recognize some of the words in there, and I know people have said, well, there's a Spanish word in there, and certainly people have said, well, there's English words, I can hear them in there. So it's almost like a linguistic paradolia, which might happen with any. I don't speak Japanese. Maybe if I listen to a long tape recording of Japanese, I might think I heard an English word. I don't know. If I didn't know I was listening to Japanese, that is. But that said, I wonder if there's not something to that, the sort of linguistic paradolia thing, like the way so much of this seems malleable in a way.
Yeah, and I find it. I would like to talk to Scott Nelson about the difference between him perceiving the building blocks of language and like glossolalia. Because I can do a pretty good, wasami kazabuliatsu just something like that.
Although,
and
that doesn't sound like glossolalia, but you did a really good job.
Well, I appreciate it.
There's a ghost standing next to me. He's very offended. I don't know what she said.
There you go.
There's a lack of sort of the spilling out of belief and I'm not sure what you call it. The attitude, that goes along with the glossolalia.
You're exactly right. And what I would love to have seen happen, and this is one of those things like that you just don't see because people's heads aren't in this space in that way when dealing with Bigfoot. Would love to see a comparison of the Sierra sounds to speaking in tongues. I would love to see that, which is kind of what basically barbarous words are. But I would love to see somebody making those comparisons and see if there's something about the cadence or some aspects that are shared. So, yeah, I just think it'll be, again, might lead nowhere, but we sure as heck don't have a Bigfoot body after all this time, so why not try something new?
What's the deal with the baby crying sounds? Can Bigfoot imitate human speech?
Bigfoot, or at least something in areas where people see Bigfoot, seems to be an incredible mimic. Human speech, baby sounds, machinery sometimes, any bird you can imagine, even people's voices. People have heard their own name or their own pet's name called in their voice from the woods before and attributed it to Bigfoot. The problem being, I don't think anyone's actually seen, Bigfoot standing there, moving their mouth and making these sounds. They're just assuming because they had Bigfoot activity in the area and then they heard these sounds, well, it must be Bigfoot making them.
One tiny bit of pushback. There is an account that I found from China of a gentleman who saw a Yuran. I believe his name was Yang Wenchun. In 1977 in Shanxi province, and it made like 11 or 12 different sounds, including a sparrow chirping, dog barking, pony neighing, leopard growling, and an infant crying. Having said that, in terms of North America, Tim, I'm pretty sure you're right, that you just happen to have these voices that always sound kind of off or a little bit too deep, and then later someone will see a Bigfoot, or they'll see a Bigfoot, beforehand. What's interesting to me is that baby crying sound. Like I think about that sometimes, especially like when my toddlers were infants, like hearing them crying and being like, how would I feel if I like heard that coming from the woods, right? Like that would be incredibly creepy. And what's interesting is that they've actually done studies, like not weird people studies, but actual academics have done studies of this stuff. And there is a physiological response that human beings, even who don't have kids, don't like kids, don't want kids, still have a physiological response to the sound of an infant.
To hearing the baby crying sounds.
Yeah. Which is super creepy if you extrapolate that out.
It does also have an analog to the fairy lore.
Absolutely. Yeah. You'll find that description a lot of times. It gets harder by the day for me to separate anything from fairies, but there's plenty of overlap with that as well. The other thing as Timothy was saying, like a lot of different imitations of things like train whistles and cowbells and sounds of like computer noises, like just the strangest things.
I understand that there was a group of people out in the woods. I don't know if they were hunters. I imagine they were. I don't remember exactly, but they were looking for their lost friend, and they were calling his name over and over, and eventually they found him. And then when he was with them, maybe at the campfire or the campsite, they heard someone or something else calling his name, mimicking what they were doing.
That's creepy. I don't know how I'd react in that situation.
So, John Keel said the two most common sounds associated with paranormal investigations were crying babies, number one, and car door slams, or something which sounded like a car door slam. I have heard the car door slam on 2 occasions out in the middle of the woods where there were no cars anywhere around. On one of those occasions, I actually recorded it. So I have it on tape. Sounds like a car door slamming. So, believe it or don't. But we were 3 miles down a trail, along a river. There was no cars anywhere near us. On one occasion, I heard a maybe baby crying. This was at a haunted bridge in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. It was a cold November night. We were there, and we heard a baby crying. Now, it's possible someone could have had a baby somewhere around there that we couldn't see, because Gettysburg's a pretty populated area. But so that's an I don't know. But it was definitely an eerie thing, hearing a baby, on this haunted bridge. And I've wondered if I was out in the woods and I heard a baby crying. Like, I think that would be super creepy.
And that wasn't a crybaby bridge, Tim?
No.
Okay.
No.
The car door thing.
Can you tell us about crybaby bridges?
Yeah, they're everywhere. Most of them are BS.
What are they?
They're supposedly bridges where there's supposedly bridges where there's some sort of infant death, or like a mother kills herself with her infant in her arms, or an infant drowned, or something along those lines.
A bus of school children sometimes.
Yeah. Some overlap. I think Nick Redfern has talked about this. Some overlap, I think, with Goatman legends too. Like, these are 2 things that you just find in like a lot of small towns, and like enough of the stories are identical that it's pretty obvious that it's just the same, meme being sort of perpetuated from town to town. But that doesn't mean that people don't go there and don't actually have strange things happen. It just means that the story that's associated with them is likely some sort of fabrication. And again, here we are sitting in the middle of this like thought form, tulpa, expectations, Philip experiment kind of place, where it's like, well, how much of this are we sort of creating ourselves with our own expectations? I'm glad Tim mentioned the car door, because I was trying to tee him up for that. And something else that, we were talking about the Sierra sounds, something else that Ron Moore had experienced was a car door slamming right outside their camp. And he was like miles into the wilderness. Like, they would have heard the car drive up. Nobody's going to come out there for any other reason than to be with them.
I don't think a car could make it up there. He had to get a horse, a specially trained pack horse, to get up in the mountains there. Yeah.
It almost sounds like the Patterson-Gimlin area was only, as far as I remember, was only attainable by horse.
Yeah. These guys on the West Coast, a lot of these places they go are real remote, real rough areas.
But that's the fascinating thing too, Tim, is that like you have this phenomena happening in these remote areas, which begs that sort of, if a Bigfoot cries in the forest and no one is around to hear it, does it actually make a sound? But also, as you pointed out in your corner of Pennsylvania, like, you don't have to get too far out of town, or even out of town. Like, there's a section in the book where we talk about people seeing Bigfoot in, like, an empty lot in downtown Phoenix. Like, it's just something that happens, and it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I've taken 3 reports from 2 separate people of, these hairy little creatures, the Littlefoots. We call them Albatwitch here.
Say again, Albatwitch?
Albatwitch, yes. It's a German word. Alb is German for elf, and then I believe it comes from there's a German word called entwinchen, which is a verb, means to escape in a gliding-like fashion. If you read about the reports of people describing the movement of these things.
Oh, Albatwitch.
Yes.
Yeah.
Albatwitch. Mm-hmm. But I've taken, like I said, 3 reports that come from my town, and this is a town. This is not. I don't live in the middle of the woods. I wish I did. Right. But I live in a town, a small town, and 2 different witnesses who do not know each other in the same area have reported this thing. One guy saw it twice. Another woman, unrelated to him, saw something that makes that description. Separately in the same area. So yeah, it's like Josh was saying. It's like sometimes you really don't have to be out in the middle of nowhere. It's almost like If the wild man wants to tap you on the shoulder, he'll come into the town park and tap you on the shoulder.
Right.
Which, I mean, to me implies that we're dealing with something that's, I mean, obviously not only not flesh and blood, but also very much tied to either the land or, individual trees or individual areas. I mean, there are some reports that I have of people seeing Bigfoot-like creatures and or finding Bigfoot footprints in parks in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And it reminds me of these stories that you get. There's a great resource that's out there, the Fairy Census, that was put out by Simon Young as part of the Fairy Investigation Society, which is a collection of just, I think it was like 2000 to 2014, I believe. So just like that 14 or 15 years worth of cases where people were sending in submissions. And so many of these stories are like, I was sitting in my grandmother's courtyard garden in like in downtown Manchester, and I saw a fairy,
Mm-hmm.
So it really is this idea that wherever there is just a little bit of land or a little bit of nature being cultivated,
A little greenery.
yeah, it's kind of like a pagan version of wherever two or more are gathered.
Exactly. Yeah. And that leads me to another question that I'm sure you guys have heard. There is an Oz effect with Bigfoot encounters. Can you tell us about that and about infrasound, what it is, and how it seems to affect witnesses?
Well, Tim, am I talking too much?
No, this was your chapter. Take it.
Okay. So what I'm going to say is going to sound a little bit contradictory, but you hear one of two things, right? You either hear that, you either hear that all the sound stops in that very Jenny Randall's Oz effect sort of way. So in case people don't know, Jenny Randall's coined the term Oz effect. Oz factor, Oz effect. I always mix that up. Which one is it? Oz effect, I believe.
I think it is.
She coined that term to describe the pre-UFO sighting silence, almost like people enter a bubble reality, right? And by silence, we mean
sounds stop and the wind stops.
All the ambient sounds just drop out. And you find that in some Bigfoot reports. One of the reports I was mentioning in Chicago was a gentleman who saw a Bigfoot in Schiller Nature Preserve, and it's right beside O'Hare. And it had a lot of the different trappings that are associated with weird Bigfoot, right? So there were some indigenous burials in the area. There was a sound of like a weird tropical bird that they heard beforehand. And I believe it was prayer that made the Bigfoot go away. But before that, all the sounds dropped off. And like, if you've ever been near an airport, especially someplace like O'Hare, like it's never going to be quiet. So you get that, but you also get the polar opposite, which is this preternatural sort of buzzing or ringing sound happen, which, I'm working on a project right now that's looking at a lot of comparisons to near-death experiences. And man, that pre-experienced buzzing you find in NDEs, OBEs, alien abductions, fairy abductions, it's Bigfoot stuff as well. It's just, you hear it a lot. And you'll find stories still about, somebody thinking that there was a hummingbird flying around them. They couldn't see it, but then they saw a Bigfoot. Or even some older stories that I found of people who were washing their clothes at a river and they were afraid of the Bigfoot hypnotizing them, or Bigfoot humming. And, I think there's one story where somebody hears a Bigfoot making this humming sound as it comes up to their window, and they're in a bunk bed that's like looking out an 8-foot window, and this thing looks in the window and then it walks away and the person goes to sleep, which is another motif, the idea that people see these crazy things and they go right to sleep. Well, fairy stories, alien stories, etc. But that implies to me that there's some sort of change in consciousness going on. And this is something that I think that cryptozoology is going to be very slow to get on the bandwagon with. UFO studies have just now gotten used to the idea of consciousness being a part of the equation, and cryptozoology is going to be really slow to get on the bandwagon with that. But having said that, I ran across an encounter of a person who claims that his son completely, his knees buckled in front of him, and he went basically went catatonic because there was this dark shaped figure. They were on a Bigfoot hunt that was in the tree line, making the sound that he compared to a didgeridoo. Which I have one right over here, but I'm not gonna entertain anyone with.
My ex-wife played didgeridoo and did
your
circular
right?
breathing and all that kind of thing. Is amazing.
Yeah. No, it really is a cool, unique sound. Everybody has heard it, but he compared it to a didgeridoo. And that got me thinking about a couple of different things. So if you're familiar with the didgeridoo, it's, your lips are buzzing a sustained drone while you're vocalizing above it. So you've got these two pitches going on at the same time, a drone with a vocalized pitch. And the didgeridoo, as well as other sound techniques, have been used to induce altered states of consciousness. Robert Monroe famously uses binaural beats to induce OBEs and whatnot.
Journeys out of the body.
Yeah, and the didgeridoo is used in shamanic practice, and also in a sacred practice. Some of these overtone singing in certain parts of the country. So tube and throat singing is something you can find popularly online. And I was thinking about, so here's my line of thought: buzzing sounds, eyewitness account of a didgeridoo drone with vocalizing over it, sounds like tube and throat singing. And I'll be damned, there's an excerpt from Al Slate and Al Berry and Slate and Al Berry's Bigfoot book. Thank you, Tim. Which Tim has described as sort of the grandfather of where the footprints end.
Al Berry Picker.
Al Berry Picker. And he describes hearing the Bigfoot sound. It starts with this sort of drumming, and then there's this monotone, and describes this sort of rising and falling of pitches and a monotone. He says it sounds like something I once heard in a Japanese monastery. And if you look at when Bigfoot, that book, was published, and when the last practitioner of overtone singing in Japanese Ainu practice quit, it's like a 2-year window where he wrote it before the last practitioner. So that made me think, okay, so we've got the buzzing, we've got the didgeridoo sound, we've got this description that sounds like overtone singing, and again, I'll be damned, on an episode of Strange Familiars, Timothy's podcast, he actually captured this sound that still sounds uncannily like overtone singing, and it was on site with a witness where he had his Bigfoot sighting. Tim?
Yes, that happened. Back to you, Josh. No, I met a witness in an area.
True.
He was describing these different Bigfoot encounters. He had two in the same relative area. But we actually stopped at a pond less than a mile as the crow flies from where he had his sighting. And there was a woman in white legend with this pond, and this was one of the first woman in white and Bigfoot things that really kind of keyed me in to that connection. But we were there talking. He was telling me about the legend of the pond and how close it was to his sighting. It was a very cold day, and we were only going to be there for a few minutes. It was a day in March. And I hopped out of the truck and did not put my jacket on because I thought, well, we're just going to be a few minutes. And the wind was just cutting through my shirt. It was very, very cold. So I wasn't really concentrating on any extraneous sounds. But I didn't hear them while we were there. And I asked the witness, I was like, did you hear these sounds while we were there? And he said, no. But upon playing back the tape, during our whole conversation, pretty much you can hear what sounds like tube and throat singing. In the background, kind of underneath us, there's a 3 to 4 second clip. I think I caught while we weren't talking, but the rest of it we're talking over. But you can hear it in the background constantly.
So the implication to me is that, there's a lot of talk in Bigfootery that they use infrasound. And Timothy and I have gone on the record of saying it gets quite old hearing how many times infrasound is trotted out as the answer to every anomaly, because infrasound is, extremely low frequencies that are used by some
military.
Military, but in terms of a natural
Government.
capacity, in terms of a natural capacity, though, tigers and I believe some large aquatic mammals to sort of stun or disorient prey. And that's true. Infrasound does do that. It does have a basis in the animal kingdom. I do not believe it's been proven in primates. And it sure as heck hasn't been proven in Bigfoot, but literally every single anomaly, Bigfoot disappears, ball of light, sensation of being scared, sensation of irrational fear, Bigfoot speaking or anything. They'll just write off to it being infrasound, the effects of this infrasound. And I think that taking a look at this buzzing sound, which again, super common in a lot of different entheogen and psychedelic trips as well. If there is something about this experience that involves an altered state of consciousness, and I think that a lot of paranormal encounters do, this sort of gives cryptozoology an end to explore that, I think. The idea that maybe there's something that produces the sound either on its own or in conjunction with other factors to facilitate an altered state of consciousness that then, goes into your brain and says, what outfit am I wearing today? Let's see. They've got some fairies. They've got some gray aliens. Oh, look, they got a Bigfoot outfit. I'm going to wear that today. Just an idea that I've been playing with. Probably ties into pineal glands and DMT or something as well. But I think that it's worth exploring. It's a way for cryptozoology to explore that altered state of consciousness avenue that they've denied for a while.
Yeah. So again, here's a question, and either or both of you can tackle it. What are Littlefoot, shape-shifting Bigfoot, juvenile Bigfoot, something else entirely?
Probably, for my money, something else entirely. In as much as anything paranormal can be something else entirely. Again, I think it's all connected. UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts. I don't know how it's connected or why. I just, gut feeling tells me they're somehow connected. But I do not think, that what people are saying as far as these little people, the albatwitch, we call them here, puckwudgie, they use in New England, the various names for them, depending where you are. They have been often written off by cryptozoologists as just juvenile Bigfoot, but they're very rarely seen with adult Bigfoot. I mean, I'm sure there's a case somewhere where someone saw an adult Bigfoot with a small one, but so I won't say never, but almost never. Certainly the albatwitch, all the reports we have, they've never been seen with a big Bigfoot, and the body. The construction of their body seems to be slighter. They seem to be slimmer, not as bulky as Bigfoot. So they seem to be something else entirely, and something certainly supernatural.
Well, Tim, I think you're dismissing all those photos of Bigfoot with a baby.
Yeah, everyone on every blurry Bigfoot photo in Facebook, all you have to do is you look in the comments and you wait, and eventually somebody will go, "I see it. And she's holding a baby."
and in fact, it's been postulated, maybe you mentioned it in the book, that Bigfoot is blurry, just to begin with. No matter what camera you're using, Bigfoot is a blurry creature.
That's a Mitch Hedberg joke. One of my favorites. Yeah.
I think what I would say resonates a lot with Tim. I mean, there are a handful of cases of chunkier Littlefoot being seen in conjunction with Bigfoot, and the idea that these are juvenile seems pretty logical at first, but then you look at indigenous testimony, and a lot of times they'll say that these are completely different things. You'll have the Bigfoot, and you'll also have the little people, which are often described as being just like these Littlefoot creatures, small, short, and hairy, which lines up directly with a lot of Western European fairy folklore. We tend to think of fairies as being little men and medieval stockings and trousers or whatever. But there's a robust tradition of more simian fairies that are these little short monkey-like creatures. We're talking about like brownies, urisks, gruagach, boggarts, Tommy, and the French goblin, the original French goblin, all have this sort of monkey-like faces and these hairy bodies. So it seems to line up a little bit more with that. You've also got, further confusing things are the fact that, fairies were not only shapeshifters, but also size shifters. There's one story I remember of a Scandinavian changeling that, ended up stretching its body and reaching all the way up to the rafters. So you kind of have to say, kind of have to ask yourself if maybe we're dealing with different phenomena or the same really strange phenomena at different phases of it being large or small. I mean, it's interesting.
Josh, when in my early days of seriously getting into Bigfoot, I remember one of the flesh and blood explanations for these little people were that all the Bigfoot from all over the country basically send their little feet to camp. So they have these areas, like where you're seeing like around here where you get the alba twitch and so forth. That's basically that they're sending the little ones there to basically to Bigfoot camp.
And that's how we make $1 million with an animated Netflix series, Tim. That's
there
it.
You go.
Littlefoot Camp. Come on.
Or maybe Nickelodeon.
But see, I love that, Tim, because I feel really torn because I love cryptozoology and I love a lot of cryptozoologists, and a lot of the ones that I think highly of have been in the flesh and blood camp or have come in and out of it. But I think that explanation that you just mentioned really indicates the goofy thinking that really permeates a lot of cryptozoology and makes them not be taken seriously, because they're always working backwards from an assumption. They're always working backwards from a premise that they've solved it.
Right.
It's the Rube Goldberg machine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
You build this unnecessary machine in order to explain, something essentially unexplainable, but
even more bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not Occam's razor at this point. It's like Occam's butter knife.
Yeah.
Occam's club.
Yeah.
Occam's kitchen knife. It seems like there are cases where people drive long distances to make wood knocks and other interactions with Bigfoot, and then when they drive home, they get the response. Can you tell us about that?
I love the story. You want to take this one, Tim?
Are we talking about the gifting story about the guy in my gifting chapter? Yeah. So I've heard the stories of people getting wood knock answers, like 30 miles away, they do a wood knock, they get home, and then they get the same pattern in response or something. Definitely heard those, but there's a gifting story that I talk about in volume 1.
And before you do, can you give us a really short, brief, fundamental, basic review of what gifting is in this sense?
Yeah, gifting is a term. It's used generally in the Bigfoot community for people who feel like they, for whatever reason, they are having an exchange of items, usually food, not always, with the creatures. And they feel that they are leaving things for the creatures, and the creatures are leaving things in exchange to them. Usually there's an exchange. Sometimes it's just, they're leaving food or whatever the case may be.
And this also goes way back to fairy lore, right?
Absolutely. It's a one-to-one comparison. If you look at like fairy gifting and, a lot of the accounts of Bigfoot gifting talk about people stopping and then things going crazy when they stop, particularly when there's food involved. And you can go back and find fairy reports that talk about, these fairy reports. Which was one from Scotland, I think, Josh. I'm drawing a blank. Was that a brownie?
That was a brownie from the Isle of Inch.
Yeah. So they were feeding it and they stopped and it just went nuts. There's another one, I think it killed their livestock. There's another one that talks about, they didn't give it beer and it made a mess of their house or something. So there's these reports, and it's essentially one-to-one comparison between these reports of people who stop these gifting exchanges with Bigfoot, and then Bigfoot will kill their pets or kill their livestock or, start banging on their house and climbing on their roof, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it definitely goes back. This particular report, a guy was he was leaving food in a cooler, and he said the cooler was such that it had a clasp on it that nothing really without hands could open it, not even raccoons. That was his assertion. It had to have been something with more dexterous even than a raccoon. And he was stopping, and this is an area that someone had taken him to and said, Bigfoot was here. And he would go and he would leave food in this cooler, and every time he'd come back, it'd be open or overturned, and the food would be gone. And one day he forgot his wallet, and so he couldn't stop at the grocery store. Usually he'd stop at the grocery store close to this place. It was about 50 miles from his house. And he'd stop closer to this place and buy some groceries and some vegetables or whatever, and put them in this cooler, and then leave. Well, this day he didn't have his wallet, so he couldn't buy any groceries. He couldn't buy any vegetables or produce to leave for these Bigfoot. So he went into the woods anyway. He wanted to go anyway. He enjoyed the exchange and visiting them and looking for them and so forth. He goes in anyway, and he sets the cooler back up and closes the lid and the clasp as if he had left something in it, and then he leaves. Well, on his way out of the woods on the trail, he said things started going crazy. He heard monkey screams, I think, and then he said pine cones started raining down on him from all sides. Mm-hmm. He was eventually hit with a scream that was so powerful that it put him on his knees, and I believe he said he wet his pants as well. He felt that he was being run out of the woods, and the creatures were very angry because he didn't leave any food for him and so forth. He gets in his truck and drives home 50 miles. And 2 different highways, I believe he said, two different major highways. And then gets to his house, and that night, something starts banging on the side of his house. And his girlfriend, who was previously a non-believer, said, what the blank have you done? You've brought these things home now. Now what are you going to do?
By the way, you can say whatever the fuck you want. You can curse on my channel, no problem.
Oh, I just lit up like a boy in a candy store. Oh, this is great. Okay.
This is not an FCC type of deal. This is a YouTube channel, so curse away.
Well, I like to be child friendly.
There you
myself. Go. I don't know. Fuck it.
I've been to your house, Tim.
My kids speak worse than I do.
Right.
Actually, that reminds me. I seem to recall something maybe in the book about people that were out in the woods and they were cursing, and the Bigfoot dropped an F-bomb, right?
Yeah. That was a guy on witness on some property in Michigan. And he was getting like twigs and sticks thrown at him, and he's like, "What the heck? What the fuck is this?" And like everything is like fuck. Of the woods around him, and again, no Bigfoot, but being pelted with stuff, and he had seen Bigfoot on his property as well. Tim, do you want to finish your
Yeah. So over the following nights, the more activity happened around this guy's house. I think his side of his house was getting slapped most often, and it was getting very upsetting for him. And he said eventually at his girlfriend's prodding, I believe, again, she was a non-believer until this moment, he went out onto his back porch and he spoke to his backyard, essentially spoke to the night and said, "I'm sorry, I didn't bring any food. I should have brought food. I didn't mean to offend you. I'm sorry. Please stop this." And I believe he said something was thrown that hit right beside him at his house, but that was the end of them slapping the side of his house.
He spoke to the forest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And a happy ending.
Well, he had a heart attack a couple of days later.
Oh my goodness.
Was this related to his experience? I don't know.
Yeah.
The host of the podcast on which this story appeared posited that one of 2 things was happening. Bigfoot were either playing, whispering down the lane. In other words, like, one group of Bigfoot, said to the other, like, get this guy, and that's how they were able to track him.
Like a chain.
Like a game of telephone, yeah.
Yes, essentially. And the other idea was that Bigfoot had somehow peed on this guy's bumpers or tires or whatever, and was able to track him that way, 50 miles to.
And I don't even know if bloodhounds can track something 50 miles. Like
down two highways, I mean, yeah. That, again, if this is a natural creature, it's gifted with such genetic gifts that it might as well be paranormal.
Yeah.
I love that story, Tim, because I can't really put a pin in my paranormal Bigfoot like transition, or pivot point, but that one might be pretty close to it, because I remember hearing that from somebody. I don't think it was on that particular podcast. I think Wes might have mentioned on Sasquatch Chronicles, where he appeared on Sasquatch Chronicles or something. Mm-hmm. And that was the moment where I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Like,
yeah. Well, the Woodknocks in response. I mean, the people getting responses, that makes zero sense at all. Like, what natural creature?
Well, and I feel like I've heard similar stories about like somebody knocking and getting into their car and driving home and hearing knocks. Like, I'm pretty sure that's happened some other places too, although I haven't been able to track them down.
Les Stroud has a I don't think it's an answer knock, but he has a story of being like somewhere not Bigfooting and like hearing a knock in an anomalous way. I forget exactly how the story goes, but I know Les Stroud has a somewhat similar story.
And I would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the fact that knocks are like the most common poltergeist and seance.
Sure.
Response.
And that leads directly into my next question. I think it was Lauren Coleman with the BFRO, the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, has noted that poltergeist phenomena that would otherwise be inside a house is the same activity as in the wilderness. How does that play into the Bigfoot world?
Well, a lot of people have noticed that. I remember distinctly reading this on Lauren Coleman's blog back when he was still running Cryptomundo. That you can draw some comparisons between Bigfoot sightings and Bigfoot activity and poltergeist infestations. Poltergeist, I should know the term. Poltergeist manifestations, poltergeist situations. And that was a very interesting idea to me. And I sort of wanted to peel that apart and, wanted to see how deep that rabbit hole really goes. And if you look at sort of the Class B reports from the BFRO, the ones where everything happens up to Bigfoot being seen, right? So footprints, knocks, strange vocalizations, disembodied voices, unpleasant smells,
that
things being thrown at you. The feeling of unnatural fear, things being thrown at you, especially rocks and pebbles. You put any of those into a house and it becomes a poltergeist setting. And the only thing that you will find in poltergeist accounts that you will not find in Bigfoot accounts are like spontaneous fires, right? But everything else you'll find up to the point that, like, one of the most famous poltergeist things is these apports of objects, which you will find rocks in poltergeist accounts that fall from the ceiling or fly out of nowhere, fly out of the field of vision, and they're always warm to the touch, right? And sometimes Bigfoot rocks are warm to the touch, and the conventional explanation is that Bigfoot's holding them in its hand, but it really is interesting. You have the Minerva monster flap in the 1970s, I believe, in Minerva, Ohio, where the kids were watching this figure on the ridgeline above their house in conjunction with a lot of other Bigfoot activity and sightings. Yeah, they were throwing rocks up there. I think they even marked an X on a rock and threw it up there, and it was thrown back to them, and it was warm to the touch. Now, that could be a primate standing up there and holding it and, warming it up.
Yeah.
Or it could be an apport that's somehow associated with these figures, because there are several accounts of people during seances, which is the other situation where you'll see poltergeist phenomena, generally like, hauntings or specifically poltergeist cases centered around an agent representing spontaneous, psychokinetic energy, or seances. or these are the common forms of spirit communication, where moving things and noises and raps and whatnot. And there are cases of people seeing basically Bigfoot during seances. Large hairy creatures. One was seen by Stan Gooch. One was manifested by the famed medium Frank Kluski. These things that are either ape men or like hairy creatures or like cavemen. Several accounts of that. So you've got to wonder, if you transpose all that to the forest, why are we now calling it Bigfoot? So that's when I sort of came up with the idea of the Wildernessgeist, the idea for wilderness poltergeist. I don't know if that's what's happening or not, but it's interesting to me that like a lot of these phenomena, you can take the same suite of with a lot of these paranormal phenomena, you can take the same suite of symptoms and sort of interchange them, because poltergeist stuff shows up at alien abduction encounters, and hauntings obviously have poltergeists as well, and you can kind of do that with these things. Same reason that a light in the sky is a UFO, a light in the woods is a fairy or a Bigfoot, a light in a house is a haunted house.
And it seems like
really
you can just remove the Bigfoot, and it's a poltergeist encounter just in the wilderness.
I mean, or keep the Bigfoot, citing those seances that we talked about. Maybe keep the Bigfoot in some instances. I mean, you want to go even weirder, like hairy hands often manifested during seances, and there are reports of disembodied hairy hands and disembodied Bigfoot torsos, like just a pair of hairy legs running across a field, or a hairy monster that just comes out, a hairy monster hand, just the hand that comes out of nowhere to grab someone. So it really is about sort of pulling that apart. And another famous instance of poltergeist activity, in conjunction with the Bigfoot report, and I'm going to sort of take the reins on this from you, because I want to hear Tim talk about it, is the Ape Canyon case, which is like this darling case of cryptozoology. Like, you can go your entire life being a flesh and blood Bigfoot fan and hearing the stories of Ape Canyon from conventional cryptozoologists who want to present Bigfoot as a giant monkey, and never hear what actually went on at Ape Canyon according to one of the primary witnesses' own accounts. Timothy.
We're speaking of Fred Beck.
Yes.
Who was at the cabin in Ape Canyon. Now, if anybody doesn't know, the story of Ape Canyon that's presented by traditional cryptozoologists and several Bigfoot books that I read in my life that I always heard was a group of miners went up to mine in the mountains of Washington State, near Mount St. Helens, I believe, somewhere. And they encountered a Bigfoot creature, and they shot at it one day. And that night it came back with a few of its buddies and attacked the cabin they were staying in, threw rocks at it and banged on it and stuff. It was a very, very harrowing story. But when you read Fred Beck's account, and again, he was there, and there's some other newspaper accounts that we found that sort of hint at something strange going on as well. But in any case, most of the newspaper accounts present the story as that, but Fred Beck himself says, wait, there's much more to this. And Fred Beck describes this journey to the mine, which starts with what he called a giant Native American ghost of some sort. He doesn't say how big, who tells them to follow a white arrow through the wilderness in the sky. So here we have something white. I don't know if it was glowing, but here's a UFO connection. They're following something in the sky through the wilderness. Along their way, they meet what they called another spirit. Why am I drawing a blank on her name? Something white. What is her name? Josh, you remember?
Vander White.
Vander White, yes.
Yep.
Yes. They, for whatever reason, they named this female spirit Vander White. I was going to say Vanna White. Vander White. And she made such a positive impression on them that they ended up naming their mine after her. They named it the Vander White Mine. But anyway, they excuse me, they follow this arrow in, and it leads them to this mine. It's a gold mine that, according to Fred Beck at the time, basically was still producing gold. And if you had the nerve to go find this place, you could mine gold there. Still, they abandoned the place after what happened. But yes, they did see a Bigfoot creature, and they did fire at it. But before that ever happened, they were hearing strange sounds coming from the ground around the mine, strange noises in the mine. They found either 2 or 3 footprints in the middle of a sandbar by the river, which was an acre square. Mm-hmm. And they said it literally looked like something picked a creature up from the sky, dropped it down. It took 3 steps and picked it up again and left with it. So there was no entrance or exit trackway. There was just 2 or 3, whatever it was, footprints there. So they're having this strange activity before it ever happens. Fred had an report of a pencil. He said he needed a pencil one day, and he was 100% sure this pencil was in his house, and it appeared right in his hand when he needed a pencil. Very, very strange idea, but again, Josh mentioned these reports kind of happen with these cases. So in any case, they shoot this creature one day after they'd seen it, I think a couple of times before that day, but they saw it this day, and one of the miners shoots at it. And indeed, their cabin, was attacked. And it was a very harrowing night, including the pieces of chinking were missing in the cabin, and creatures reaching through and like grabbing axes, and they had to like quickly think and turn the axe in its hand so they couldn't pull it through the chinking. Things like that, and climbing on the roof and so forth. And it's very harrowing, very frightening. And they decided the next day, we're getting out of here. I believe the next day they fired at one more creature, and it fell off a cliff, presumably to its death. Although no body ever recovered, of course.
Right.
In any case, they leave the mine. They never go back. That was enough for them. But it was surrounded by all this strangeness that has never been reported, except in, I think, Fred Beck's own account. At least I've never read it anywhere until we talked about it again in Where the Footprints End.
It really strikes me as one of those sins of omission things, because I don't think anybody ever said it didn't happen. It's just like, but at the same time, it's just so important to that story.
Yeah. And
if you're actually being intellectually honest, how do you leave that out?
Well, and then there was that other article you found, which didn't specifically mention like 100% this is the same case, but it mentioned miners being attacked in a cabin in that area. What other case could it be? And that said they did find footprints around the cabin in the morning, but they were all left foot?
Left foot or right foot, I can't recall. But yeah, it was around like the same month of the Ape Canyon case in the same area. So it has to be
and
that too.
This
so there's
is
another
literally where the footprints end.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. What a lovely title, isn't it, Tim?
It is an excellent title, Josh. I wish I came up with a better one, but
Tim, was that your title?
No, it was Josh's title. I'm very upset about that.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah. So the idea was that we started off the show actually talking about this, how these footprints are really the best evidence that we have for the existence of Bigfoot, and like they're the best scientific evidence for Bigfoot. But they have only taken us so far, and we have to go beyond where the footprints end in terms of telling us about the phenomena. And at the same time, that also is, a direct reference to the fact that there are, in many cases, these very clear Bigfoot trackways that lead off into, typically an abandoned, an empty field, and then they just stop. There's no signs of backtracking. There's, too far away for it to jump to some sort of, medium that wouldn't transfer footprints, like they just end. And so that was sort of the beautiful, poetic, powerful name of Where the Footprints End. Yeah.
I think
and
it's
a little bit of Shel Silverstein
title
in there too, probably.
Researchers have claimed Bigfoot hair and DNA evidence. Can you tell us how paranormal Bigfoot could leave those scat, dermal ridges, and the like? Either of you?
Well, the problem with this primary evidence is you can get people to claim. There's been 2 major DNA studies. One has been Melba Ketch's study, which, if you take the word of pretty much any other geneticist besides Melba Ketchum is very problematic. Very, very problematic. But let's say Melba Ketchum was right, and a lot of the flesh and blood people say, well, mainstream science just won't accept her findings for whatever reason, whatever. But let's say she's right. If she's right, she describes in her report something she calls angel DNA as regards to Sasquatch. So it's human female on one side, and the male side is unlike any other DNA of any other creature on the planet Earth. So
now,
if it is
when
correct,
you say the male and the female, do you mean the nuclear DNA and
mitochondrial
DNA?
Yeah. So the female DNA that we all have, in these Bigfoot samples, according to Ketchum, is human female. It's identical to human female. Mm-hmm. And the male side is, like I said, she called it angel DNA. It's unlike any other animal alive on the planet. So if she is correct, and again, you can't find pretty much any other geneticist to back up her findings, but if she is correct, then we're talking about something that's so different from any other animals and so unusual that once again, it might as well be paranormal.
Sorry, your audio dropped out. Could you repeat that?
I said, if her report is correct, and it has this DNA, this angel DNA she called, then it's so different from any other creature on the planet, including like octopi, which some people say might have come from outer space. They're so different from other animals. But it's so completely different from anything we know that if we're correct, we might as well be talking about something paranormal anyway, because it's not a normal animal if that's the case. But like I said, her DNA study is according to geneticists. I'm not a geneticist. I'm not a scientist, but according to geneticists, it's very flawed. The other DNA study was done by Brian Sykes, Dr. Brian Sykes at Oxford University. He took in tons of samples and turned up nothing but existing animals, known animals, except there was a Asiatic bear. One of the samples sent was supposed to be a Yeti sample, turned out to be an Asiatic bear, which was thought to be extinct. So it's like a prehistoric bear they thought was extinct. So that's very interesting and really exciting. I mean, I think if you're a true cryptozoologist, the fact that they found that bear DNA should put you over the moon. That's a very, very exciting thing. But
not Bigfoot, not Yeti.
Not Bigfoot. Yeah. Hair samples, they look at them, and some people say that's unknown primate. But then other people look at that hair and they say, no, that's just human hair, other experts. So you can't get these experts to agree on this primary evidence. The dermal ridges are something else. Now, that's very, very interesting. But again, that's a secondary evidence. That's not part of the Bigfoot's body. So we do have things attributed to Bigfoot. There's even been bodies. I mean, people over the years, several people have claimed to, one way or another, to be in possession of a Bigfoot body or something like a Bigfoot. Minnesota Iceman was one. There are several cases of Bigfoot being shot over the years, dating back to the 1800s. And the one thing in common with all of these cases is that the bodies have, in one way or another, disappeared. We do not have access to these bodies. They are gone. So why is that? In terms of the Minnesota Iceman, I've heard, some collector has it in a cold storage warehouse or whatever. Doesn't matter. It's gone. The effect
the owner switched it with a fake body.
Right. Exactly. The effect of its disappearance, however it happened, does not matter. The end result is it's disappeared. We cannot have the original. We cannot study the original, and that's the case with not 99% of the Bigfoot bodies that people have claimed to have. 100% of the time, these bodies go missing. 100% of the time. So, yeah, there's interesting stuff out there, but my way of thinking is so woo, as people call it, that I think that some of these blood and hair samples are legitimately Bigfoot samples. And I think you'll test them once and you'll get unknown primate, and you'll test them next time at another lab and they're going to come up as human. And that's part of the mystery. You're never going to get a straight answer, but that's a very, very woo thing. But that, again, that's just my personal feeling on it.
Well, going back to what we talked about, because this is a difficult thing for people to reconcile, you have this, we're talking about something that has some degree of non-physicality, as evidenced by being impervious to bullets and being able to phase through things and being able to disappear, etc. There's something very anomalous about this thing, it seems, according to our position. But you do have, all this physical evidence that, so on top of it, the evidence that does exist, that does present itself as anomalous, well, how do you sort of reconcile that with the idea that we're dealing with something strange? And again, like we talked about earlier, Bigfoot's leave ghosts leave footprints. Ghosts, there's ectoplasm in seances. Ghosts can slam doors. Ghosts can leave handprints. Another thing about poltergeist infestations is that, sometimes poltergeist will write on the wall, and they'll actually examine the medium, and it might be organic material or it might be charcoal or whatever it is. There's a physical measurable effect left by some sort of non-physical phenomena. So that's sort of the way that you can start to maybe make some sense of it. But I mean, it's weird. It's a very weird idea that something would correspond so closely to primate behavior, because there are aspects of Bigfoot that really do seem to align with the primate hypothesis. You've got a lot of depictions of Bigfoot on totem poles in the Pacific Northwest, and they'll often be in this O-shaped hooting mouth position, which is very evocative of simian hooting. Also, some Bigfoots will actually have their hair stand on them when they're aroused or they're alerted. It's called piloerection or piloerection, something that chimpanzees and other primates have exhibited as well. So so you have all these things that really correspond to primate behavior, but then you have things that don't, right? So interestingly enough, we sort of alluded to Bigfoot being shot. The common excuse is, well, Bigfoot's skin is really thick, or Bigfoot has a really dense layer of fat. Well, as long as we're talking about how closely
there's a lot of muscle, almost like armor.
Right. And as long as we're entertaining the idea that Bigfoot is a primate, then we should expect there to be some degree of predictability in what we know about current primates. And in current primates, the skin is actually thinnest where there's a covering of hair. And this is, easily demonstrable if you've ever had like a cut on your scalp. Like that thing just opens up and blood goes everywhere, right?
Or like the palms or the soles of the feet.
Right. So that doesn't seem to be a skin thing. Maybe it's a muscle thing. Although I think about, the animals that seem most impervious to gunfire are things like rhinos and elephants, which have skin orders of magnitude thicker than primate skin, any primate skin that we know of. Then you've got, the idea, well, there's a layer of fat or something. But, and people will often cite the fact that bears don't go down with a pistol. Well, yeah, that's true. But, I've seen video of a bear who does a complete 180 when it's shot in the face with birdshot, which isn't especially strong. And here's the thing, they react. And you have these stories of people shooting Bigfoot at 10 paces with a scope on a hunting rifle, and the thing just gets up, doesn't even look at them, and walks away. It's something, there should be some sort of reaction there. There really should. And and then you have these other people who say that, well, Bigfoot is the physiology, sort of like what you're alluding to with the muscle. Their physiology is structured in such a way that there are either bone plates or their bone structure you can't really get. You have to shoot it through its armpit, right? Well,
the heart's in the armpit, yeah.
Yeah, which is actually a thing, I believe, with pronghorn antelope. The best kill shot is through the armpit. But it's not really
tough shot to get if you can get it.
Yeah, but delicious. So what these seem to me like, stories like that, are much more in line with this sort of folklore motif of the beast who has one vulnerable spot on it, the one scale missing from Smaug's belly,
the Achilles tendon, so to
speak.
Well,
or we found there was a Baba Yaga story from like Siberia, where it's like a Baba Yaga variant, and she's described as this giant hairy witch. And she's only trying not to laugh.
This is the one that lives in the hut.
Hut on Fowl's legs, yeah. The hut on Fowl's legs.
Can travel.
And supposedly in the story, she shows up and she's singing outside someone's cottage one night, which is a very Bigfoot thing to do. But she's only killed by the hunter after he shoots her in the anus with the bow and arrow. Now, hilarious, right? But the point is it's still embodying that myth theme, I guess, of the creature who's the Death Star, only vulnerable from the thermal exhaust.
For some reason, the Bigfoot outside my window is now clasping his hands over his buttocks, Josh. I don't know why.
It's because he saw you, my friend.
Josh, how would Terence McKenna address the ethnobotanical aspect of where the footprints end?
I forgot about it.
Well, it's really quite interesting. If you take a look at some of the pharmaceutical resources that certain indigenous people had, it's quite similar to what you'd see in other parts of the world. You'd find Amanita muscaria, which certainly has its own share of wonderful conflations with fairy folk and all sorts of other things. But it really is quite interesting if you could think that maybe it might have something to do with the Bigfoot phenomena as well.
Now, Josh,
Yeah.
how would Alex Jones reply to him?
That's all a bunch of bullshit. We all know it's goblins. Goblins. Bigfoot is a goblin. He smells the sulfur and stinks. I really want to. So in like, if I had enough time to actually be bored in my life, which I don't, because writing and music and toddlers,
Family.
and family, and then sleep. I would really love to do I would really love to do a series of book readings of Dr. Seuss by Terence McKenna and Alex Jones, and put them on the his videos.
Dude,
and put them on the
I am so there.
It would be. I've thought about it. It would be so much fun.
One fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish.
I love it.
I'm going to work you really hard one time and just have a round table. It's just going to be you and me, but it's going to be actually you and me and Terence McKenna and Alex Jones.
I'll host.
The thing is, if I do it for too long, it starts to fall apart.
Yeah.
It's kind of like how when I do my Bill Clinton and I say, Hillary and I really appreciate the American people and their support. And if I go for too long, it just turns into Jimmy Stewart. Mary, don't you know who I am, Mary?
I never thought of that, but yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah,
one will slide into the other inevitably.
Every impression of mine ends up as Ricky Ricardo, no matter where I start.
I had this interesting theory. Have both of you seen American Dad, or parts of it?
Sure.
The other Seth MacFarlane cartoon.
Yeah,
he has an alien living with him named Roger, and I don't think anybody's ever asked him this, but I kind of wonder if they didn't base Roger's voice off of Terence McKenna.
Oh,
because it would be so appropriate.
Really good point.
Yeah, but it's just a fan theory that I have. I mean, fan implies that I'm a fan of the show. I don't watch it, but what little bit I've seen, it sounds exactly like St. Terry. So
yeah. Okay. Last question before we do our giveaway. What is the unwakeable sleeper motif in Bigfoot lore, and how is it paralleled in UFO/fairy lore?
Oh wow! So this is something that you'll hear a lot of times in alien abduction stories, where it'll be this commotion, this buzzing noise and light streaming in through the window, and there'll be three gray aliens standing at the foot of the bed, and they're beating, if they can move at all, right? They're beating on their spouse, and they're not moving, they're not waking up, right? And I have found the same thing in some older fairy texts, where a woman that one specific anecdote I'm thinking of is a woman who is having her child carried away by the fairies, and she's really trying to shake her husband awake, and he's just not moving, he's not budging. And I'll be damned if you don't find the same thing in Bigfoot stories, which, again, seems too specific, too odd to say that there's not a connection there. And not only that, it's not like it's not an uncommon thing either. One of the most famous examples was Doug Hadjichik, who was up at the remote site, I believe in Canada or Alaska. I'm gonna say Canada, Snellgrove Lake, and he was with another researcher and his son, and he describes it there at night because there's really like Bigfoot sightings around there, lots of that Class B activity, in addition to Bigfoot sightings, and someone singing, actually, which is interesting too. The sound of a voice singing out across the lake, but like really, really active area. You can see some of what happened on some of what I think are the best Monster Quest episodes they had up there on Snellgrove Lake. But one of the incidences that wasn't filmed was they were up there and like the entire trailer, the entire cottage, whatever they were in, escapes me. Something was smacking on the doors, smacking on the walls, running on the rooftop, like shaking the entire structure, and he's freaking out, right? And he goes in, and his son and the other researcher are just out cold. And he says he's hitting on them so hard he feels like he's hurting them, and they will not wake up. And the activity ceases, and he's able to get them up. It's like you wouldn't believe what just happened, right? There's another incident where I was might have been that the Big Thicket book by Tom Burnett and Riggs, but I can't remember exactly who it was. Or maybe, no, I think it was a Tom Powell book. Where, there are these people who have this perimeter defense, perimeter alarm set up around them to alert them to, anything near the camp on the Bigfoot expedition. And something sets it off, and there's a bunch of squatchy activity, but like the guy cannot wake up his research partner to save his life. This guy's just out cold, which has so many implications. Not only can fairies and aliens seem to be able to control sleep, but it really underscores the fact that sometimes these experiences are meant for one person. There's a real personal aspect to it, and I think it's just a really interesting correlation that and the Bigfoot and missing time are two things that when I found those out, I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm done. It's paranormal Bigfoot.
Yeah, it's very interesting how similar all of these stories are to UFO abductions and poltergeist cases and all that kind of thing. I am going to drop the BFRO website into the chat just because I feel like it's worthy of people being able to go and take a look. They do a lot of interesting stuff, and if you're willing and able, and you have the money, you can even go on a Bigfoot hunt or whatever they call it. And there's one in Missouri that I'm looking at. I'm a chronic pain patient, so I'll probably have to drive the truck and be on the radio, but still it would be thrilling to go.
I'm willing to take anybody's money if they want to pay me to take them on a Bigfoot hunt. I'll take your money.
Will we see anything?
I can't guarantee anything. There's no guarantees in anything.
It's in the fine print.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so let's go ahead and do our giveaway. It's going to be for Volume 1 of Where the Footprints End. And all people have to do is put a number between 1 and 14 into the chat. And I would like for you, Josh, to pick a number between 1 and 14 and just keep it to yourself. Think about it. You can,
This is why I'm always awful at like Zinner cards and stuff. It's because
sort of the remote viewing
overthink it.
thing,
Yeah, I always overthink it.
But
I'm going to put a number in my head and see if it matches Josh's number. I'll be honest.
No, we don't want to confuse it. But I would like for everyone in the chat to please enter a number between 1 and 14. And the one that's closest or is on the money with Josh's will be the winner of an autographed copy of the first volume of Where the Footprints End. And then next week, we're going to have these two gentlemen back on, and we'll give away an autographed copy of Volume 2. That's my understanding, anyway. Mm-hmm. So we're at 2 hours. Please get your number in, and we will call it 30 seconds to get your number in. We have Ivan Ivanovich with 7, Phantom Boomer with 9, President Clark with 8, Don McDouglas with 13, Darius Munchausen with 8, Mr. M.H. with 14, Canadian Spider-Man with 10. We'll call it 15 seconds. Darius Munchausen with 4, Red Walrus, Hail Red Walrus with 2. Nuke Joe is at 17, which is outside the parameters.
He really doesn't want that book.
Yeah. So choose again. Cam has 8 and then changed to 3 because I think 8 has already been taken by Darius Munchausen. And before that, President Clark. So that's why Darius Munchausen chose 4. So Nuke Joe, please choose again. And we will call it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hey, by the way, did you guys see Richard Branson launch himself into space and come back?
Yeah.
How cool is that?
I'm of two minds about it because, like, one meme that I saw with Bezos was like, my dad got to watch people go to the moon, and I got to watch the guy who killed bookstores ride a giant penis into space. But
what is it about billionaires that have to go to space? I don't get it.
But at the same time, like, I think that I've already read that they've lowered the cost of getting like a pound of payload into space by like 44 times cheaper or something. Mm-hmm. So like I think that opening up space is a good thing. I'm kind of cynical on space in general. Like, I think people put a lot of emphasis on space, and it's kind of like, okay, that's fine. If you really, it's like people who like these YouTube videos of video gamers who like are trying to like get off the map, and I'm like, okay, sure, if you want to see a bunch of nothing, great, go for it.
Yeah.
So,
floating in a tin can.
Yeah.
Okay, Josh, what was your number?
So is this like Price is Right? So what if somebody didn't pick my number?
Well, we'll go the closest without going over.
Okay, so Price is Right style. So I picked 12.
Oh, 12. Okay. I think we had a 13.
We did have a 13. Here. That goes over.
That goes over. So do we have a 12? You had 12 was your number?
Yeah, 12 is what I had in my mind. I didn't change it. I never didn't see any 12s. I'm like, should I change it? But I stuck with the 12. So no 12, no 11.
Spider-Man.
Canadian Spider-Man.
Canadian Spider-Man.
Has a 10.
Yeah.
Woohoo! Congratulations. Don McDouglas says, I said 13. That was over 12. Price is Right style.
We Price is Right style, yeah. Beep,
Yeah.
bop, ba-da.
But next week, we'll be eligible. Everyone will be eligible for Volume 2. And I guess one of you will sign Volume 1 and the other will sign Volume 2. Is that right?
Yeah, unfortunately, we live too far apart. There's got to be 1 or 2 copies of it out there that in 30 years will be super valuable. Where we both sign it. Yeah.
Good deal. All right. Well, I will go ahead and ask our winner to send me his mailing address, and then I'll go ahead and get that along to you, Josh.
Okay.
And then it'll be on the way. Congratulations, Canadian Spider-Man. And thanks very much for being with us today. It was such a great show. I really appreciate you guys being here. It was just a fantastic episode, and welcome into the Fringe. And I really look forward to our episode next week, next Thursday.
Thanks for
Sounds
having
good.
me.
Same bat time, same bat channel,
All right.
as it were. All right. Thanks again. Thanks to everyone in the chat. And we will see you next time. It's Cardinal Sin out.